2 years after the Inflation Reduction Act gave the IRS an additional $80 billion taxpayer dollars, watchdog groups are questioning where that money went. Interestingly, the IRS did release its own report card on its initiatives, and joining us now to discuss that evaluation is Executive Vice President of the National Taxpayers Union, Brandon Arnold. Good morning, sir. Great to see you as always. And again, this $80 billion is spread over the course of what, 10 years? But we have to point out that the 2022 spending bill increased IRS funding by 50%. So before we, get into this evaluation of where the money has gone, let's first talk a minute about the massive amount of taxpayer dollars. In the private sector, you put a budget together in order to get money, right? That's not what happened here, though. Talk about the process.
Yeah, the process was broken. So if you have a broken process, you're going to get broken results. And what happened here was Congress wanted to squeeze more money out of taxpayers, and they decided they could do so by giving the IRS $80 billion in additional resources on top of its existing budget. Therefore, when their goal is to squeeze money out of taxpayers, all what I would say are the really important things that we need to do at the IRS, like modernizing the agency, like making sure taxpayers aren't harassed and can get the answers that they need. All of those goals became secondary or tertiary, and it just became about squeezing money out of Americans.
What is this report card the IRS gave itself? Because I'm sure this is the first time most Americans have ever heard of this.
Yeah, basically they called it a report card, but they just put out some numbers in isolation. They didn't put them in context, and they didn't even give themselves a grade. So if you read through this, you see all these impressive numbers. For instance, they increased call responses by 1 million. 1 million more calls answered last year relative to the previous year. That sounds really good, but again, if you put that in context, their answered calls are way down relative to 2017 through 2021. So they're answering fewer calls than they were a few years ago, but they're claiming success because they did slightly better than the previous year. That's why they're getting C's and D's on NTU's report card, even though, again, they didn't give themselves a letter grade.
The goal was to lay out the strategic operating plan and then grade themselves, so to speak. The funding was eventually reduced by about $20 billion, right? Right after some wrangling in the House and the Senate there. So the goal was to, quote, rebuild, revitalize, and hire agents. This was also to update a very archaic and aging IRS system that needed a whole lot of work. What was accomplished by this?
Yeah, they still have a long way to go. For instance, you talk about the hiring of new agents. There were reports out that they were going to hire 80,000 more people at the IRS. Well, they set a more modest goal earlier this year of hiring 3,700. And 6 months into that hiring process, they'd only hired a few dozen people at the IRS to fill those enforcement roles. So they're way behind on hiring. They're way behind on bringing up the agency and modernizing it. They have invested in some hardware, but they're lagging in software that would actually make this agency more efficient, so we could hopefully reduce its budget without sacrificing any kind of performance. We need to increase efficiency there, but it's moving so slowly. Its goals are really misaligned.
Where's all this money right now then? What's the recommendation from the National Taxpayers Union?
Well, we need to redirect money from the enforcement arm of the agency, which is where the bulk of these additional funds have gone, and send them to improving taxpayer services so that they are taking care of the taxpayer when they have calls, when they have inquiries, when they have problems with the IRS. They're able to get an IRS employee on the phone to promptly and accurately respond to their questions. Right now, that is a secondary goal. It needs to be number one.
Yeah, your organization says the funding needs to be paused, and they need to develop a clear plan for really also modernizing along with a budget estimate for the technology and training that's required to get up to speed, because as of right now, it does still seem like a very archaic system that is way behind the times. All right, Executive Vice President of the National Taxpayers Union, Brandon Arnold, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.